Joined now by Lincoln Mitchell, the national political correspondent for the New York Observer, and Tara Dowdell, a political and business marketing consultant. Great to see you guys. It's an exciting day, I think, for democracy. I'm going to start with the loaded question, and Tara, I'll start with you. Would you expect that by the end of these contests today, we decisively know who the Democratic presidential nominee is and who the Republican nominee is?
Well, it looks like we will certainly have a clearer picture of that if you continue to follow the polls and you look at the consistency in the polls, especially since the last week and a half or so. There's been a really consistent trend. Donald Trump is extremely dominant on the Republican side, and Hillary Clinton is very dominant on the Democratic side. We know that. The issue is going to be, though, will these other candidates step aside? And I'm not convinced they're going to do that right away. So I think you might have a longer, more protracted primary, even if both of these candidates who are polling so ahead right now stay ahead. I'm not convinced that there's going to be this mass exodus from the race.
Lincoln, so far the thing that people have been talking about a lot is the number of people that have been going to these rallies, especially for Donald Trump and Bernie Sanders. They have been drawing tens of thousands of people. As we watch turnout today, will that turnout affect what we are seeing in the general election? In other words, will they be able to translate those crowds into votes?
Well, you mean the general election or the primary?
Yeah, the general election and the primary.
Well, it's not clear that Bernie Sanders or Donald Trump will make it to the general election, so
right.
we'll have to see that. But look, rallies are one of many techniques. To bring people to a rally is one set of mechanics. The mechanics of getting somebody to vote on election day, particularly in a primary, is much different and requires a different campaign tactic and a different set of skills. On the other hand, generating excitement is important, but it's really hard to say what's going on in March and how that will influence what goes on in November. If Donald Trump is the nominee, that will generate a great deal of excitement in the Democratic base to vote against him, regardless of who leads the Democratic ticket, for example.
One of the states holding a primary today is Virginia. It's an interesting state because it's got a diverse electorate. Could it give us a glimpse into what we might see in the national election?
Well, certainly you can draw some conclusions based on what happens in the primary. But as Lincoln said, you know, it's a much different ball game once you get into a general election. Now, I think when you look at a state like Virginia, it's interesting for a candidate like Hillary Clinton, because Hillary Clinton has been directly going after the Obama coalition. And much has been said about the African-American part of the Obama coalition. Not much is said about the rest of the Obama coalition. 3 out of 4 Asians supported President Obama. There is a significant Asian population, particularly in Northern Virginia, right, that people don't talk much about. 3 out of 4 Latinos supported President Obama, and so you're starting. So I think you can see whether or not she's made significant inroads with the Obama coalition, not just in terms of maybe getting votes from them and beating Bernie Sanders with those votes, whether or not what proportion of those votes are important, but whether or not she turns out more of those voters is what's going to be really important, because turnout is going to be key for any general election.
But when we talk about the Obama coalition, one of the things that was missing from the Obama coalition was the angry vote. Lincoln, there's a lot of anger in the electorate out there. It has been tapped into on both sides. Will they vote?
I would just caution that in every election, virtually since 1976, we've heard this anger narrative, right? Ross Perot is the candidate of the angry voter. Pat Buchanan is the candidate of the angry voter. Jimmy Carter even was the candidate.
Actually goes all the way back to the
Andrew Jackson was the candidate of the angry voter.
This is a constant. Obviously, if you're really angry and think everyone in Washington is, to use Donald Trump's words, a total disaster, you're not really going to be drawn towards Hillary Clinton. On the other hand, once the dust settles 8 months from now, if Hillary Clinton, who is an insider, who is an establishment figure, is the nominee, she's going to be making a different argument. Angry white voters, probably not so likely to vote for the candidate who's trying to keep the Obama coalition together. But Obama won without those twice, and Hillary Clinton can win without those voters this time, if she's the nominee, which we don't know until really.
I want to talk about Texas a little bit and what that means for the GOP race, because according to our correspondent, we're actually seeing some Trump gains there. What would you predict happens there? And don't they have a rule that if any candidate does get more than 50%, they do actually get all the delegates in Texas? Could we see a blowout there? And is it a lock for Cruz?
Well, I think that right now, Senator Cruz looks very strong in Texas. It's his home state. He has an excellent get-out-the-vote operation that he has implemented and done and executed well before in Texas. That's how he got elected. He also does pretty well for such a conservative Republican with Hispanic voters. And I want to make a distinction because people talk about Hispanic voters as if it's a monolith. When Cruz is Cuban and the Hispanic voters, the primary block of voters in Texas are Mexican. And so I think a lot of times there's not enough attention paid to the distinctions in the voting patterns of these different groups. Also, it depends on what states they're in. So I think Cruz, yes, is well positioned. He is positioned well because also he has, the name recognition in the state. He doesn't have to spend a lot of time getting his name out there, and he's popular in his state. But at the same time, what Trump is tapping into is making an impact, and I think he'll come closer than people anticipate.
Cruz is also the Tea Party favorite. He is the darling, and in fact, that is the reason his support is so strong in Texas. But you heard our reporter, Heidi Jo Castro, saying that race is now down to 3 percentage points, which means that Trump is surging, Cruz is not. What does this say about the Tea Party in Texas?
Well, first, this is a great deal at stake for Ted Cruz in Texas. Not just if he loses Texas, he has no real story to go forward in this election, but also if he loses Texas, not even 2/3 of the way through his first term as the senator, right? He becomes vulnerable for re-election in 2018. So he has a great deal at stake. What this tells us about...
And he has both governors supporting him.
Right. What this tells us about the Tea Party narrative is different. The Tea Party, when it originated in 2009 as this kind of reaction to President Obama, backed by a lot of corporate money, was presented by the right wing and the Republican Party as kind of this grassroots conservative movement. It was critiqued by the left as this racist, nasty movement, largely a reaction to a progressive African-American president. Well, if a lot of Tea Party supporters are moving towards Trump, then maybe the left was right, so to speak.
Well, I mean, he was just endorsed by David Duke,
exactly.
former leader of the KKK.
And that Tea Party vote is not drawn to the kind of royalist economic policies of the Bush family, but instead to the kind of angry populism of Donald Trump. So a lot of people may have misread what the Tea Party was all about.
All right, this is just the beginning. I know both of you are going to stay with us and have more conversations. Lincoln Mitchell and Tara Dell will check back in with you throughout the morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
So